Welcome to the Oxygen Alliance YouTube channel, where we bring you videos on installation, maintenance, and various trainings on oxygen equipment and devices. If you have comments and/or questions, drop them in the comment section below or write to us info@oxygenalliance.org. Remember to like our videos, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Partner Talk, which is proudly brought to you by the Oxygen Alliance. So you might be wondering that we are calling this the Partner Talk. So we have decided to do a bit of rebranding. So we won't be calling them Oxygen Talk anymore. We'll be calling them Partner Talks because here now we're inviting special guests from different partner organizations that the Oxygen Alliance is working with. So all calls which have a special guest from one of our partner organizations, we'll be calling them Partner Talks, and the talks that are done by the Oxygen Alliance technicians will be called the Oxygen Talk. So don't get confused. My name is Mwabi Lungu, in case some of you are joining us for the first time, and I'm hosting the call from Lilongwe, Malawi, and I would be very happy to just know where each one of us is also joining from. So please just type your name and location in the chat so that we just know where each one of you is joining us from. So speaking to us today is a guest from PCI Gases, and he will be talking to us about medical oxygen security. So I will now invite Tim Boulton, who is the Director of Sales and Business Development, to share with us what he has prepared for us. So I will now hand it over to you, Tim.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very good morning. It's good afternoon, actually, in I think where most of you are as well in Africa. So a very good afternoon. Yeah. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk here. I'll try and be as concise as possible. As you can hear, I'm a native English speaker. So if there is anything that I say that you don't fully understand, please feel free to ask either in the chat. Or I think there will be time at the end to ask some questions. Okay, so I think we can jump right in. The company for which I work is a company by the name of PCI Gases. We've been around for about 40 years now, based in Riverside, California, USA, with manufacturing facilities in Bangalore, India, and in Brazil, Curitiba. So let's jump straight in. I think most of us here on the call are familiar with the different types of oxygen, how medicinal oxygen can be supplied. I've just got this overview here for you. So there is the cylinder supply, which most of you, I think, your supply is, most of it is cylinders. You can either, or you can have in from bulk, that is your liquid oxygen, or on-site systems, or a pipeline, whereby pipelines are only really relevant for hospitals which are right next to the air separation unit. But those are the four basic ways of delivering oxygen to your hospital or to the customer, as it says here. Okay, so conventional oxygen supply, which I've just talked about, is from a centralized air separation unit. This is a very good way of producing oxygen. You take the ambient air and you break it down into its parts. The biggest problem with it, obviously, is that it requires a logistics chain. You're in the middle of a country somewhere, or next to a large city, and therefore you need a logistics chain to get the oxygen when it's being produced from the plant to the hospital. So the supplies from an air separation unit are either LOX, which is liquid oxygen, or gaseous high pressure cylinders, which we are all aware of. The challenges are the movement from the manufacturer to the healthcare facility and the patient. It's a hub and spoke method. which is obviously conditional on your local conditions. So you have to have a truck which can go from the air separation unit to the hospital. So it's conditional on, it's complicated very much by geography. So if you have large distances, such as Nigeria, for example, or you have political stability, instability, conflict situations, and so on. So in general, the more complex the logistics chain is, the higher the cost and the lower your supply security. So typically, if you're in a very, very remote area, the cost of your oxygen is only a small part of the logistics cost. And if you're in a very remote area, your supply security is typically quite low, i.e. if there's bad weather conditions or something like that, then your supply is not secure. But the alternative to this is to generate your own medicinal oxygen through a process which we will go into now, from the ambient air. Obviously, we have oxygen all around us. So the composition of our air around us, just as a recap, most of you will know, is a vast majority of it is nitrogen, 78% nitrogen, 20.9% oxygen, and the rest, the remaining 1% is almost entirely argon. There is very little carbon dioxide, water vapor, and other gases, but they all make up a very, very small proportion of the ambient air. So on-site, so we're talking today about on-site generation plants. Some people sometimes call these PSA plants. That is because the PSA plants were the original technology, if you like. They're the standard technology. In a minute, we'll go into a few other technologies which are available, but the basic technology is basically the same. Pressure swing absorption, PSA, or vacuum swing absorption. I'm using these two expressions today frequently because they are also the ones which the WHO has now included in the new pharmacopoeia. So the new WHO pharmacopoeia, which has just been published for medicinal air, calls out PSA and VSA as the standard forms of on-site generation. They all work in basically the same way, and what they do is that they take ambient air and they press it or draw it through a tank or similar, and it's filled with zeolite. So we call those the zeolite beds. Filtration of ambient air, then the zeolite holds back everything but the oxygen and the argon. Everything else is caught in the sieve. It's held back. CO, CO2, hydrocarbons, water vapor. They're all held back in the molecular sieve. It is a completely regenerative process. So that is why the process is called adsorption with a D rather than absorption with a B. Absorption would be a chemical process. Adsorption is a regenerative process, which is, if you like, reversible. It's a physical filtration process. So here we go to what I've just said is the standard conventional type of oxygen generation plant, and that is the typical PSA configuration, which I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with. But just to go through it quickly, you have an air compression package. You then have to treat the air, i.e. it has to go through a dryer, refrigeration or an absorption dryer. You then have a compressed air buffer tank. It then goes into a twin tower PSA. This is the typical format. So it's a twin tower PSA. You then have the oxygen tank, and then it goes off to your pipeline system or to the high pressure booster for cylinder filling. This here down the bottom here is just a picture of the PCI VSA technology. We call them deployable oxygen concentrator systems, DOCS. This is just a picture of a DOCS, an actual DOCS system, but we'll come to the structures and how they both work in a second. So here, the next slide here is showing the comparison of the twin tower PSA technology and the VSA technology. And as you can see here, the PSA technology is quite complex in terms of feed valves. You need to have an air dryer. So the major part of this is that it is a single stage system, i.e. the pressure that you have in your pipeline or going to the high pressure booster is generated by this initial air compressor. That typically works at around 7 bar pressure. The air is then treated, it then goes through an air tank and then into one of these 2 absorber vessels, as you can see here. And as you can see from this arrow here, this bed would be generating the oxygen. But what you don't see here is that at the same time, this is why this arrow is down, is that there will be a part of that oxygen is being taken and it is cleaning the other side. So this is generating and this is being cleaned or purged. So this is generating, this is purging. So you can see it's like a balance. This is up, this is down. When this zeolite sieve is full of everything but oxygen and argon, this process through these valves then reverses, and then this side will generate the oxygen and this side will be purged. So this would be up, this would be down. When this is generating, this would be up, this would be down. This is why the technology is called swing. So it's pressure for the intake pressure, swing for the swinging backwards and forwards between production and purging, and adsorption, which is the technology. The big difference, if you look on the right-hand side of your screen, is this is typical VSA technology, where you have the air intake. You'll notice that all this part is missing, basically. So there is the compressor, but the air dryer and the compressed air buffer tank are missing. The actual air compressor here is not a compressor, but it's a blower. All that means is that instead of taking a 7 bar intake pressure here, we are working here at approximately maximum of about 0.9 bar pressure. So the oxygen here is produced or generated here at 7 bar. In the VSA, it is generated at less than 1 bar pressure. The oxygen produced then goes through here into a process tank, and there is also a purge recovery tank. I'll get back to that in a minute. And then there is a second stage. So this is just one stage. So as I said, the pressure you have going to the hospital pipeline is generated here at the point of intake. Here it's a low pressure intake, less than 1 bar. And then the produced oxygen is taken and it is then pressured up to the required pressure by a second stage, an oxygen compressor, an oil-free oxygen compressor. So that is the comparison of the two. What you can see here, I think that'll come up here, is if you then look at the power requirements, we'll get back to that in a minute, but the number of main components and the VSA is less, as you can see here, and the number of process valves is also significantly less. What this means for you, in effect, is that the service and maintenance, that the VSA systems are more robust, and they require a lot less service and maintenance. So these are the alternative oxygen generation plant. Very often people will call this PSA, but we really need to get away from PSA. I don't call them concentrators in presentations like this, because concentrators are very often confused with the bedside units or the individual patient units. So the terminology that I prefer to use is oxygen generating plants. If you say plant, most people understand what you need. So what we've just seen is that the traditional 2-bed PSA is a 1-stage process. You must dry the intake air. Why? Because the higher the pressure, the more condensation there is. So if you pressure in at 7 bar pressure, then you have to make sure that the air is very dry. Otherwise, you will have condensation, i.e. liquid water, which will then damage the zeolite sieve. So sieve, which is saturated in water, does not work. So it's a single intake, 7 bar, and the compressor for that intake can either be oil lubricated or oil free. We will get back to that point in a minute. The VSA system is 2-stage. There is no intake air drying required because the intake pressure is no more than 9 bar, so there is no condensation produced. The water vapor is caught in the molecular sieve and is blown out on the purging stage. The blower is completely oil-free. Just to mention that there are other on-site generation plant technologies. There is a double-stage PSA, which is their effort is to make more than oxygen 93 plus minus 3%. That is quite a new technology, and it's just now coming onto the market. That, I think, claims to give you oxygen 98% plus minus. But we can talk about that if somebody likes to know more about that. That is basically from the company Novair. There is a multiple modular PSA. That's a modular system such as the one produced by the German company Stefan. There is also VPSA, which is vacuum pressure swimming absorption. Vacuum pressure swimming absorption typically is, as a general rule, too large for hospitals. It must be a very large hospital because these units typically go down to maybe 2,000, 2,500 liters per minute, no lower than that. The VPSA has its own separate vacuum pump. Okay, oil lubrication versus oil-free. Big advantage of oil lubricated, we're talking now PSAs. The big advantage of oil lubrication is its price. Typically, the oil lubricated compressor will cost around 70%, depends on the country and your supplier situation, but typically the cost of an oil lubricated compressor is 70% less than the equivalent oil free. What that then gives you is a much lower capital expenditure of your complete PSA system. So oil lubricated systems very often, especially in low and middle income countries, where budgets are very often much more limited, is that it can seem to be a very attractive alternative. There are, however, disadvantages to an oil lubricated system. You must remove the oil. So the oil contamination of the product must be removed through filtration. Therefore, your oil filter change is key. It's obligatory. You must keep changing the oil filters. If you do not, then you'll get oil into the system, and an oil into zeolite, into an oxygen generation plant, will actually kill the zeolite. You cannot clean it. You must then either change the tank of zeolite or try and open the tank and remove the zeolite. It can go further than that. I've personally seen oil in hospital pipeline systems. So it's gone straight through the system and it's gone into the hospital pipeline and will ultimately reach the patient, which is not what you want to do. As it says here, oil contamination is a big risk. It'll destroy your sieve bed. If it gets through, it will potentially contaminate the hospital pipeline system. And the worst of all, it will potentially reach your medical devices, your ventilators, your anesthesia machines, and maybe even the patient. So if you want to take advantage of a much lower price, you must be aware of the risks involved. I've put here service cost purchasing. Because what very often happens in many countries is that the purchasing officer comes along and says, is your oil filter still functioning? And the answer is, well, yes, it is. So we say, well, leave it for a couple more months. and then maybe leave it for a few months after that. And so that is something that we all have to be aware of, that if you do not change the filter, you will destroy the system. Let's go to the total cost of ownership. The total cost of ownership is, there are key supply factors, which are the supply security, which we talked about before, i.e. the further away you are, the more expensive your medicinal oxygen becomes and the less secure. If you want to be independent of the delivery risks, then you must choose an on-site system. You're also reducing health and safety hazards to staff. I think some people tend to forget that if you have cylinders in the hospital, they have to be taken off the truck, they have to be taken into the hospital, and all this, you need staff for it. And oxygen cylinders are inherently dangerous, not really because of the oxygen gas itself. An oxygen cylinder you can obviously open in a room and it won't do any harm. The problem with oxygen cylinders is the pressure. So you're at 150 or 200 bar pressure, and they are dangerous. I'm sure some of you have already experienced it. If you were to damage a valve or something on an oxygen cylinder, it will fly. That's how torpedoes actually used to work, i.e. compressed air or compressed gas. So they are very dangerous. If you do not treat oxygen cylinders correctly, they will potentially kill you. Also to be mentioned is that with an oxygen generation plant, you are independent of the recurring purchasing requirements. Somebody then saying, well, the oxygen is running low and we need to reorder. You then call your oxygen cylinder supplier and he says, yes, we'll be with you in 2 weeks. You say, well, my patients are dying now. So you need to have your on-site generation plant will make you independent of those. One point here in red, which I wanted to emphasize very much on this call, is that I've seen very many countries are requesting high pressure filling systems. The primary function of the on-site oxygen generator should be to directly supply a pipeline. Why? Because the systems will generate enough pressure in the pipeline, 3, 4, maybe 4.5 bar typically. You do not need more than that. If you take your oxygen and you put it into a high pressure booster, fill the cylinders, the oxygen is boosted to 150 to 200 bar pressure. You then take it to the patient and you then pressure it back down. You need a pressure reducer for it to be able to use in your ventilators or in your anesthesia machines. Cylinders are only necessary for logistics purposes, but it is very expensive to use a high pressure booster. A high pressure booster is expensive to buy. It can be almost as expensive as the actual oxygen generation plant itself. They are maintenance intensive, so they need to be serviced after 2, 3, 4,000 hours. And their economic service life on a typical oxygen high pressure booster will be around, I would say, about 15 to 20,000 hours. So if you were to use those 24/7, then really at the end of about 3 years, you'll be needing a new high pressure booster. The alternative is to put your oxygen generation plant as close as you can to your major users, either operating theaters, ICUs, emergency rooms. If you can get your oxygen generation plant quite close, it is very, very cheap and easy to lay a rudimentary pipeline. Most oxygen generation plants will be ordered with a secondary function of a high pressure cylinder filling. But if you can get your pipeline to your major users, you're going to reduce the amount of high pressure filling that you're going to need drastically. If you get a pipeline to your major users, then you can take your oxygen directly from the oxygen generation plant. I can't emphasize this enough. A high pressure booster is important for filling your cylinders, but it is important as a secondary and not as the primary function. Key financial factors of the total cost of ownership are your budget availability, so it's your purchasing price, your capital investment, and then you must also look at your running costs. This is what the total cost of ownership should be all about, which is that you need to know how much will this unit cost me over time? How long will it last? What will it cost me service and maintenance? Also important, it's becoming even more important these days, is the cost of electrical power. So you should look at how much power your oxygen generation plant is using. We'll get back to that in a minute. And also the cost of parts, service parts, and maintenance, and the availability of somebody who will help you with maintenance. Also important is the manufacturer warranty. And as I mentioned previously, the total economic service life of the unit. So if you take all these factors into consideration, you will be able to then come up with a budget that you need to secure your oxygen supply. I have an animation to show you. I should have shown you in the slide before, actually, to show you an animation of how a typical VSA plant functions. Okay, maybe I will go back to that later because I can't seem to be able to do that. Okay, I'll just go back to I'll continue with the presentation. I'll try and pull that up at the end if somebody would like to see that.
I have the thing as well. I can try and play it at the end if it doesn't work with you.
Okay, so here we got to the total cost of ownership. Let's go now to the medical oxygen, the Sustainable Medical Oxygen Access International Standards. International standards are the ISO standards, as I'm sure you all know. The most important standard for oxygen generation plants, some of you may have heard of it already, is the ISO standard 73961, which was actually approved in 2016. It's for all medical gas pipeline systems, which includes oxygen generation plants. I personally am working at the moment with the ISO International Standards Committee internationally. This is at the moment being amended. It's being modernized. So it will be 2023, maybe 2024. There will be a new version. One of the major reasons for this is that the WHO has just redefined medicinal oxygen in their pharmacopoeia, the Pharmacopoeia International. They've just redefined it. For those of you, if you'd like a copy, I can send you, or I can give it to the organizers and they can send it to you. The WHO Pharmacopoeia now defines medicinal oxygen as all concentrations. There are two parts. There's oxygen 99.5, which is from air separation plants. There is oxygen 93 from oxygen generation plants. And the WHO Pharmacopoeia, what it says is that you can combine the two. So what is it is in effect doing? It is defining medicinal oxygen as all concentrations of oxygen from 90 to 100%. The other two important pharmacopoeias, there are a lot of others, Japanese, Chinese, but the other two which are very often referenced are the United States Pharmacopoeia, which has described the product of oxygen generation plants, oxygen 93, in, I believe, 2006, and the European Pharmacopoeia defined oxygen 93 plus minus 3% in 2011. But the basis for the WHO Pharmacopoeia was these two pharmacopoeia plus the pharmacopoeia for oxygen from air separation plants. So it's 99% in the USA and 99.5% in Europe. I now have 3 slides just to show you the VSA, the actual VSA systems from PCI Gases. As you saw previously, the VSA systems are a lot less complex than a typical PSA system. The PCI Gases VSA system comes actually in two parts. So probably you would call it skid mounted. It comes in two separate parts. This is one part, this is the other part. When all is required is the two parts come, you place them according to the manual. You then connect them with this pipe, interconnecting plumbing pipe. You interconnect the cabling, and you hook up the power. So it's a very simple system which you can install within hours, typically 2, 3, 4 hours. Obviously, the site must be prepared beforehand, so you must have the electrical connections there. You should also have the pipeline connections there. We talked about the service and maintenance of VSA systems as being a lot less than for PSA. Here is just a list of components, intervals, and time required for a DOX 500. That's a 500 liter per minute, a 1 ton per day unit, 500 liters per minute of oxygen. As you can see here, typically you'll need around 13 hours per year. 13 hours per year. So all of you that will have dealt with PSA systems, you'll know that that is a substantially lower amount than normally required for a PSA. Here I've just put a few pictures up of units so that you can see what these look like in reality. Here in Toronto, in China, and a single unit here in Brazil. Everybody these days is talking about green technology. This is just really a summary of VSA technology and how it helps you to reduce your operating costs and benefit your environment. VSA typically uses about 50% less power than a PSA. The reason for that is that with the PSA, as we've seen, you're taking the total ambient air volume and you're pressuring it up to 7 bar. You are then exhausting or getting rid of, throwing away 78 or 79% of that, which is basically the nitrogen. So you've just pressured to 7 bar the ambient gas, the ambient air, but you only want to use 20.9, 21% of that. So the two-stage system, any two-stage system, so the VSA two-stage system is that you are only compressing up to your pressure that you need in your pipeline. You're only compressing up the oxygen rather than the complete ambient air, which means it's a lot more power efficient. You can also, with these systems, these two-stage systems, two-stage compression, you can also regulate the pressure according to your needs and probably altitude. Environmentally friendly. VSAs are oil-free design. PSAs can be oil-free design, but that makes them, as we've heard before, a lot more expensive. Oil-free means that you need no filtration. There is no risk of oil contamination to either patients or equipment. You have a low pressure intake, which minimizes, it not only means that you do not need to dry the air, it minimizes the absorbable bed wear. Because if you're going in with 7 bar, that also has a certain grinding effect on the zeolite, which means that after 5, maybe 7 years, if you're lucky, you'll probably need to exchange the zeolite in the PSA beds. Pollution-free, most of these systems, whether they're PSA or VSA, are electrically driven, but there isn't, unless you have a diesel generator, of course, to make the power. But in general, they are pollution-free. And they are air-cooled. You don't have any need for chemicals or cooling water or then treating that water. So I'm not sure I've done on the time. It seems I was aiming to do this in 40 minutes. It looks like I've just hit on the button. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. And I think we can then go over to questions.
Well, there's some questions in the chat, and while you're doing that, I'll try and see if I can get the animation to play.
Yeah, so the first question says, does VSA require a different type of zeolite?
Yes. The zeolite, actually there are around 185 different types of zeolite around. So depending on what you want to do with the zeolite, there are many different types. VSA, each manufacturer uses different types of zeolite. It's actually not a problem to put zeolite in a tank and concentrate oxygen to a higher level. The problem with PSA, VSA, and all these systems is it must be it needs to be optimized. So each manufacturer will use a different type. So there are different types and also different sizes of zeolite. So with the VSA system of PCI Gases, I can tell you is that we use the single tank, and we use two different types of zeolite. The initial zeolite, I believe around 10 to 20%, is very good at filtering out water vapor because we don't dry the air, but not so good at filtering out the nitrogen and other things. So the first 20% after the intake is a specific type of zeolite, and the other 80% is then much more water sensitive. The water vapor doesn't get through, and that then is the filtrate, the zeolite, which is used to make the actual oxygen, to concentrate the oxygen and hold back all the impurities. So yes, there are big differences. So if you were to try and repair a PSA, I'm sure some of you have seen PSAs that are no longer functional. That can be a potential problem if you can't identify which type of zeolite was used by the manufacturer. I hope that answers the question.
Yep. I think if there are any further comments, they will be made. And the second question says, do other companies make VSA plants, and how does the PCI technology differ?
Yes, there are one or two, I believe, two internationally that use VSA technology. I'm not technician enough to know, but I believe they use more. One of them at least uses 2 sieve beds. So this technology with using a reversible blower is quite unique to PCI Gases. Maybe a bit of background. As I said, PCI Gases has been around for 40 years, and the original VSAs from PCI Gases were actually produced with a grant or with money from the US military. The US military, as you know, were in Iraq, Afghanistan, and they were looking for medicinal oxygen supply for their medical, for their field hospitals and so on. And they wanted to find PSA technology was already available, and they were looking for a technology which is more robust and much more simple and would work in the harshest of environments. And so that's why this technology, which you'll see in a minute if we can manage to get the animation going, is you'll see it's a very simplified system. There are very few moving parts. You have the only parts that really need service and maintenance are the oxygen compressor, the stage 2, the oxygen compressor, which needs seals, and the blower. Those are the 2 moving parts. But because we are using a very low intake pressure, the amount of wear and tear on these plants is a lot less than you would have in a PSA system. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you the names of the 2 other companies.
No problem. Can I try and play the video?
Absolutely. So what you have here at the moment, this is the beginning of the cycle, as you can see. So if you look at the tank where it says nitrogen in the middle, so the blower is down, the BL100 is the blower. That's blowing in through the heat exchanger into the tank. So that is now producing oxygen, which is dark blue, and you can see it's going off to the customer. Now it's in the vacuum phase, which now there is oxygen being drawn back through the system. If you can see, there's a pressure -8. So now there is oxygen going back through the sieve, which is expelling the nitrogen. In the last stage, the purge tank on the top of your screen, that then pushes a little bit more oxygen through to make sure that the sieve is completely clean. So here we are. This is the beginning of the cycle. So the blower is pushing ambient air through. You can see the nitrogen getting caught in the sieve, and oxygen is going through dark blue, then up to your right to the booster. That is the second stage, and then off to the client, to the customer. Now the exhaust phase is now beginning. So you can see now that the valve changed. There is a minus pressure on the pressure gauge, and the oxygen is now cleansing the molecular sieve. That's the last part. As you can see, it goes down very fast. That's the last cleansing step, which comes from the additional purge tank, which you see at the top marked C500. Okay.
Should I play it again one more time? Do people want to see it again? Or I guess we're going to put this on the website, right, Molly? So people can watch it at their own convenience.
That would be very useful, actually, because you'll also then be able to see the pressures and so on involved. So you'll be able to see exactly how the technology works.
Great. I think there's more questions in the chat, Molly.
Yeah. So the next question said, you mentioned they are now two-stage PSA. Do they remove argon? I know someone tried, Mulugeta tried to answer in the chat that yes, you have 99 oxygen concentration by two-stage. Yeah. So maybe Tim, you might just want to expand on that.
Yeah. The two-stage PSA is different to a two-stage VSA, in that the two-stage PSA is your initial stage, is as you've seen here. So it's a standard PSA, which means you're then producing oxygen 93% plus minus 3%. And the second stage in the double stage PSA is then an additional stage, a completely additional filtration stage, which I believe uses active carbon filtration. And that filtration stage, the second stage, is taking out the argon, and also there is probably some nitrogen remaining. But other than that, it's taking out. So what it's trying to do, the double stage PSA is trying to take you up to close to the oxygen concentration that you are used to having from the air separation plant, i.e. 99%. That is not medically necessary. There are no clinical trials worldwide which demonstrate improved clinical outcomes with the patients with oxygen concentrations of above 90%. I'm sure, as you all know, oxygen is actually toxic. So in an emergency situation, yes, you will be giving patients as much oxygen as you possibly can, the highest concentration possible. But as soon as they're in a clinical environment, the physician is measuring the blood oxygen, and then he is titrating the oxygen and air in the ventilator or in the anesthesia machine up and down according to the amount of oxygen in the patient's bloodstream. That is typically, depending on the sickness, but that very rarely, I believe, if we have a medical person on the call, maybe they can chip in and give us some more advice there. But typically, you're not using more than 50% of oxygen. So this discussion, and then also the double stage PSA, the reason for it is they're trying to get you to an oxygen concentration which is known by your physicians and your hospitals, but it is medicinally not necessary. The international community is the international medical community is 100% clear on this. So you have an additional. Question was, so it's an additional filtration step, but anybody that is interested, they are more expensive, obviously, because you have this additional filtration step. The oxygen produced is actually not yet. It will fall within the WHO definition between 90 and 100, At the moment, it's on the way. They're trying to define the product of these two-stage PSAs in the European Pharmacopoeia, and it's being called oxygen 98. So what it's basically doing is it's closing the gap between oxygen 93 is 90 to 96%, and ASU oxygen is 99 or 99.5. So it's trying to close the gap in between. Look at the cost and look at the benefits, and then you need to make the decision. Important with that would be to make sure that the supplier will guarantee you that high level of oxygen over a longer period, because typically in any system, any type of oxygen generating plant, that the concentration will go down with time. It'll go down even faster if you don't service the units, but it will go down with time. So if they are saying they will give you oxygen 98 or 99%, then please make sure that they will guarantee you that that unit will also be giving them oxygen 99 or 98 5 years down the line, not just when it's new in your hospital.
Thanks, Tim. And just to be clear, I'm not a huge fan of 99% oxygen either. I think 93% is more than enough. I'm just more interested in the science of how they get it up there. And it would seem that the residual largest proportion is the argon. And so it would just seem that that's what they have to be removing. So yeah, thanks for that.
It is argon, but as you saw before, the ambient air actually only has 1% argon in it. So there maybe is a certain accumulation, but because the discussions that you always have with oxygen 93 is, okay, the oxygen 93 may be okay, but what's the other 7%? Mm-hmm. And so some of that is argon, but some of it is also, there is, I think, a residual of nitrogen there also.
So we actually did the calculations a few months ago just to fully understand where this theoretical upper limit of 95.6 comes from PSA. And so if you look at the 20.95% oxygen and the 0.93% of argon and the 0.04% of carbon dioxide, if you eliminate the entire nitrogen, the relative proportion of the argon is bigger, right? Because you're taking 20% of oxygen and you're making it now 95%. That 0.93% of argon now becomes about 4-point-something%.
Yeah.
Makes sense, right? Yep.
Thank you. Yeah. No, I've never. You're much more of a mathematician than I am. You're right. Thank you for that.
All right, so there are more questions in the chat. And the next question says, do you have the name of the 10% zeolite that's good at filtering out water?
I can find that out for you if you like. I can. I'll have to I'll have to check with management. Bob, I'll have to check whether we're permitted to tell them what types of zeolite we use. I think the major part, the 90% or 80%, I think is a lithium zeolite. I mean, zeolite, which is very water attractive, you're seeing every day. Anybody that's bought a mobile phone or electrical goods will very often find a small sachet in there. That is zeolite in there, which is attracting the moisture. So if you're looking for whatever reason for zeolite which will attract moisture, then that's the type of zeolite that you're going to be looking for, those like you find in those little sachets. And by the way, oil will kill zeolite, water will not, i.e. water in a system, liquid water in a system, it will not function. But if you can take the zeolite out and bake it, which is, I believe, some very clever people are now doing for your oxygen concentrators, the bedside ones, is they're heating up the zeolite, which then removes, then the water obviously evaporates, and then the zeolite is functional again. Not so with oil. We talked about oil contamination previously, but with water that is possible.
I think Bob, you were about to make a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, Tim, we know the size of the zeolite, and there's multiple sources for zeolite, but typically, yeah, we don't get that information other than the size that's used in our different absorber beds. But yeah, we don't have that information.
But if somebody would like me, I mean, you can also Google it yourself. You can find the best type. If you're looking for a moisture absorbing zeolite, then you can find that. I'm sure any zeolite producer, there are a number of zeolite suppliers. And so if you, I mean, I think you have experience with zeolite suppliers, Jerry, right? I mean, you should probably be able to help there.
Yeah. I actually was, while you were talking, I was chatting with Judy from Xintao in China. It's 8:30, but she says she's still at her desk. And I asked her what zeolite they would recommend for VPSA. And she said lithium, but she didn't know strictly for VSA. Yeah. The configuration that you have described in terms of having a layer of desiccant at the bottom of the column and zeolite above it is actually used in several brands of bedside oxygen concentrators, and specifically the Longfian J5 and J10. So they just have this physically larger, what looks like maybe 3 millimeter diameter desiccant in there. And then that looks like it's maybe 10% is separated with a disc, and then they put the sodium zeolite on top of that. So yeah, it's a process it's a sort of concept I think we're familiar with.
I think it's quite important though to say that if you have an oxygen generation plant or a concentrator, is that you really need to have that information, because you can't. I'm not technician enough to know, but I would assume that if you just put some type of zeolite in there, your oxygen concentration, I'm sure, will be better than the ambient, but it's not going to be anywhere close to the medicinal concentrations that you require.
In the very early days when I was experimenting, I think we can say it was probably the first month of COVID, I was buying jugs of zeolite on Amazon and pouring them into tubes and trying it. And they were like 3 millimeters in diameter. And I was ecstatic that I was getting 70% purity from this stuff I just bought off the shelf. But as you say, the secret is in optimizing it to get the full benefit of the PSA. Yeah,
absolutely.
All right. So we have 2 more questions, and we're fast running out of time. So I'll
be quick.
them both, and then yeah. So the first one says most of the hospitals use LOX tanks. How is your VSA cost effective compared with the LOX tanks? And the second one says, how good is the zeolite you use in VSA oxygen generators compared to synthetic lithium-based zeolite?
Maybe just the second question first. I'm not a zeolite expert, so I believe that most zeolite is synthetic. Originally, zeolite came from volcanic rock, so I'm not an expert at zeolite, so I can't really answer that question. If I can get a copy of that question, I can try and give that. Maybe the person that Jerry knows would be the right person to talk about that. That's something I cannot answer. And the first question about the LOX tanks, if you have LOX and you have a secure supply, then depending on the cost, it depends also very often on whether you have more than one supplier in the country. Many countries just have one supplier, so it's a monopoly situation. All I can say to you is that as a general rule, it depends on it depends on the individual country, but as a general rule, the BSA on-site plant should pay for itself within around 2 years. That may be 2.5 years, that may be 1.5 years. So I've personal experience with places which are very far away. So I did the calculation, for example, for the major hospital on the Maldives Islands, and on the major island there's the Indira Gandhi Hospital. I did the calculation, the cost calculation for them, and their system was paying for itself within 6 months. So as a general rule, the further, as I said previously, the further away you get, the more expensive the oxygen becomes, also your LOX, and the less secure it becomes. You also have with LOX, you have a boil off, don't forget, so you're losing also a certain amount. So what we very often see also in other applications is that they will take an oxygen generator plant as the primary source of oxygen and use the LOX as the backup.
Okay, great. So I hope Tim has managed to answer all those questions, unless if we have any comments on the responses that he has given us, we can also make those extra comments before we jump off. We are just about over the hour mark.
I can see that. Repeat the differences between VSA and PSA. Did I just see that correctly?
Yeah.
PSA is a single stage. Is a single stage with a single intake compressor. You compress the complete ambient air. You then need, because you are taking the complete ambient air and pressuring it to 7 bar pressure, you need to treat that air before it goes into the system. Your pressure at the pipeline at the other end, which is coming out to the client or to the hospital, the pressure there is produced by the original generator, the original compressor. The VSA is using a 2-stage system. You compress or you blow at a very low pressure, so you don't need any air preparation. You blow the air, you make your oxygen, and then you take the oxygen. So you're taking your product, which you need, and you're pressuring that up to the pressure that you need. That makes it inherently, obviously, instead of you're pressuring only 20% of the gas volume, which obviously means it's going to be a lot more power efficient than if you take the whole volume, pressure that, and then exhaust 20%, 80% of the gas that you've just pressured up. So pressuring gas up obviously takes energy, so it's a lot less power effective.
Okay, great. So I think looking at the time, we should stop here. And yeah, I don't see any further questions in the chat. So I think we are good for now. If we have any questions, Tim, that we get, we will make sure to forward them to you. And then you can...
Please feel free. Please feel free. As I said previously, I also work for the International Standards Organization. I'm hopefully a quite active member of the Every Breath Counts Coalition, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. So I believe I can give you independent advice.
Awesome. All right. Thank you very much, Tim and Bob, for presenting to us. It has been a very wonderful presentation. We have learned a lot. I think this is the first time anyone has ever presented about PSA, VPSA on this call. So it's been a very wonderful session. So I would also like to thank each and every one of us that joined us for this call. Remember that we always record these calls and share them on our YouTube channel, Facebook page. So if you happen to have joined in the middle of the call, then you can just go on our platforms and you should be able to catch up through the entire presentation. So reaching this far, I would like to thank you all, wish you a great weekend, and we'll see you again in our next call. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tim. Yeah.
Thanks, Jerry. Speak soon.
That was really good. Yeah. Bye.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.